This is Frank Gillard at General Bradley's headquarters. East and West have met. At 20 minutes to 5 on Wednesday afternoon, April the 25th, 1945, American troops made contact with Soviet elements of Marshal Konyev's 1st Ukrainian Army Group near the German town of Torgau on the Elbe. This is the news for which the whole Allied world has been waiting. The forces of liberation have joined hands.
The Second World War is almost over in Europe. Though allies, the troops come from two different worlds, the communist East and the capitalist West.
We were like brothers. We had defeated the enemy together. We were united in fighting fascism, and we'd won.
Alexander Silvashko and William Robertson are two of the first soldiers to meet.
The Americans gave us cigarettes, food. They gave us whatever they had, even watches as souvenirs. The atmosphere was unbelievable.
You must understand, we weren't able to really communicate with them except in sign language, and so you do the sort of things that people did. They were good people, and we had no problem getting along with the individual Russian soldiers that we met there at all. There was the relief that the war was coming now to a close, and that the Allies had won the war. We were just plain thankful that we were there and breathing.
The picture of Robertson and Silvashko together is seen around the world. Their meeting on the Elbe is a symbol for the post-war hopes of millions. Throughout the war years, they've been told they're fighting a people's war to protect their own way of life against fascist tyranny.
Your victory. We have never seen a greater day than this.
This is a glorious hour. The flags of freedom fly all over Europe.
Война победоносно завершена. Германия полностью разгромлена.
As people emerged from the ruins of Europe's cities, no one knew what the post-war map of Europe would look like.
What was to become of us? Our beautiful city was flattened.
For Berliners like 22-year-old Ilse Kruger, the immediate need was to rebuild their lives.
We took picks and hammers, anything we could get hold of. We cleaned up the bricks. And then we formed a great long line, passing them from hand to hand.
They struggled to find food and shelter. But they also knew that the victorious Allies represented two fundamentally different systems. And their future depended on which they would have to live under.
It was the Russians we were afraid of. We were dismayed when we realized the occupying powers would make all the decisions. We had to do what they told us.
The occupying powers met near Berlin to come to final agreement on the new order. To ease Soviet fears that Germany might rise again, frontiers were redrawn, and millions of people were uprooted. Though the two sides were deeply suspicious of each other, the differences were glossed over.
This is the BBC Home Service. The Allies leave this conference, which has strengthened the ties between the three governments, with renewed confidence that their governments and peoples will ensure the creation of a just and enduring peace.
Free elections were promised. But in the countries where the Soviets had driven out the Germans, all key government posts were given to communists, whatever the feelings of the local population. In the euphoria of victory, Russian soldiers like Captain Anatoly Semiryaga were in no doubt what the future held.
Нас учили, что важнейшие последствия победы над фашизмом.
We were taught that the defeat of fascism was an important step towards the victory of socialism all over the world.
Если советские войска освободили эти страны,
Since the Red Army had liberated Eastern Europe, sooner or later socialism would be established there.
And for all the public displays of Allied unity, Russians stationed in Berlin were reminded the struggle was not over.
нас собирают руководители наши и говорят,
We were called in by our officers and told, listen,
виновники той войны, в которой мы победили,
the Germans were not solely responsible for this war. It wasn't just Hitler,
это вся система
but the whole imperialist system.
Понимаете, что значит? А кто является представителем
Imperialism was responsible.
вот сейчас?
And who are the representatives of imperialism now? The same allies with whom we fought together against Hitler.
The recent Allies had their minds on other things.
When Johnny comes marching home upon this shore again, we'll pray that he'll never have to go to war again. Now we all know what Johnny did at war, but do you know what he did before? Won't you listen, listen? Johnny Jones was a choir boy, kind of shy, yes, and kind of coy. He shot down 20 enemy planes. Now he's back singing peace refrain.
It's like a new life. It's like walking from one scene of a tragedy into a musical.
Gail Halverson had spent 3 years in the Air Force.
Home, go back to see my girlfriend, plan for what I'm going to do after the war, back in the mountains of Utah. It just, all the worry and concern was just obliterated. And we disbanded our military. We just disbanded very rapidly. Now's the time for peace.
Civilian goods are already trickling from factories, and shortly washing machines and other luxuries we've missed will be pouring from the factories at 1942 prices. And with new cars and new tires on the way, America will be rolling with a pre-war flourish. Yes, cars, radios, vacuum cleaners, nylons, juicy steaks. It sounds almost like a dream.
In the spring of 1946, Winston Churchill traveled to the United States. He tried to shock Americans out of their complacency. In a speech at Fulton, Missouri, carried on radio, he warned them how the Soviets were acting in Europe.
From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. Behind that line lie all the capitals of the ancient states of Central and Eastern Europe. Warsaw, Berlin, Prague, Budapest. All these famous cities and the populations around them lie in what I must call the Soviet sphere.
Churchill's vivid picture of a continent divided by an iron curtain helped change the public mood. Once, the press had portrayed an alliance of 3 equals. Now, Uncle Joe was turned into a scheming despot, forcing whole countries into submission. From the East, Soviet cartoonists responded in kind. These crude caricatures were part of a new type of war, in which governments taught whole populations to demonize the other. An American newsreel caught the new tone.
In the background was the growing struggle between two great powers to shape the post-war world. Soviet Russia was expansively stabbing westward, knifing into nations left empty by war. On orders from the Kremlin, Russia had launched one of history's most drastic political, moral, and economic wars, a Cold War. The United States was obliged to help Europe safeguard its traditional freedoms and the independence of its nations. Gone was the spirit of wartime unity that reached its peak on that historic afternoon in April '45 at the Elbe River in Germany. Here, two worlds actually met, but this coalition was to be torn asunder.
The Soviets also recalled a meeting on the Elbe. But their version showed a bloodthirsty American general bent on the domination of Europe.
Старая война окончилась. Началась новая. Война с коммунизмом.
Я вижу другие сны, господин генерал. Мне снится мир.
Пожалуйста. У нас свобода сновидений.
Я прекрасно помню фильм «Встреча на Эльбе».
I remember seeing the film Meeting on the Elbe.
Что где-то я там буду. Мне, конечно, было
I thought I'd find my
обидно,
character
что,
played somewhere in it. I was terribly upset when I realized that it was completely untruthful.
Отражается жестокая неправда.
On leaving the army, Lieutenant Silvashko had become a schoolmaster. But now, his moment of fame was something better forgotten.
Атмосфера была страха.
Everyone lived in fear.
Мой рассказ о войне. Но
The children liked my tales of the war, but I never told them about the meeting on the Elbe.
их не было. Если бы я действительно,
If I had discussed what had happened openly, I would have been in trouble.
то меня ж бы спросили, зачем?
I would have been pulled in and questioned by the secret police.
Ответ перед органами госбезопасности.
Ich hab so Heimweh nach dem Kurfürstendamm. Hab so ne Sehnsucht nach meinem Berlin.
Berlin remained under the joint control of the wartime Allies. Its western sector was an outpost of capitalism, deep inside the communist world. Moscow decided this could not go on.
Switches are pulled on generators, and the fuel famine forces drastic power cuts. Berlin becomes a city of darkness as all ground communication is severed and industry comes to a standstill.
In June 1948, with no warning, the Soviets shut off all the supply lines to Berlin which crossed their zone.
The blockade was prepared weeks in advance. We'd done everything we could to make the Allies leave West Berlin voluntarily, because it was a mote in our eye. So in the end, we decided to force them to leave by making life intolerable for West Berlin.
Western leaders had watched passively as Eastern Europe fell under Soviet control. This time, they decided to act. Regardless of cost, they started to supply Berlin from the air. Experienced flyers were called back.
Telex came in and says, we want 4 of your airplanes to leave Mobile, Alabama, go to Frankfurt within 4 hours. And we want crews for that. And so I volunteered. We knew the dire straits that the people in Berlin were under. I was excited to join the airlift and brought along my 8mm camera. We're just coming out of the shower again, Pickering, my co-pilot. We'd fly all night and come back in the middle of the day and sleep in the middle of the day 6 hours and take off again, round the clock.
Month after month, the planes kept flying. To people in the West, the blockade confirmed all they'd been told about the Russians.
It seemed to me as we flew the airlift, it came right down to the basic level of comparison between good and evil.
Mit 250.000 Nettotonnen Gebrauchsgütern für die Berliner Bevölkerung. Diese kostbaren Ladungen nach Berlin zu bringen, mussten die Flugzeuge eine Strecke zurücklegen, die 1000 Mal die Erde reicht.
Через каждые 10 минут.
One landed every 10 minutes.
Вы понимаете,
You
какое
can
наше
imagine
было
how we felt.
впечатление, какое было настроение. И над домами, где
The
мы
planes flew
жили,
low over our rooms in the officers' quarters in Karlshorst. Those enormous planes 100 meters above us.
100, 150, 200 метров.
Beginning his own private propaganda campaign, Captain Halverson parachuted chocolate bars to the children of Berlin.
Was ich jetzt persönlich erlebt habe, war, dass etwas herunterschwebte.
Something was floating down, and many of the children knew what it was.
Und die flitzten, die rannten. Und ich dachte, naja, gut,
Everyone was running, and I was thinking, what is it? What's going on? And I started running. But there were only a few parachutes, so I didn't get one. So then I wrote to the chocolate uncle at Tempelhof Airport.
Flughafen Tempelhof.
A little girl wrote me, her name is Mercedes. She says, when you see the white chickens, drop it there. I don't care if it scares them. Well, I looked for him and I couldn't find him. I dropped all over the approach. I had my buddies in the squadron drop another letter. Look, you guys are missing this all the time. So finally I gave up on her. I took a big package of gum and candy to Berlin and mailed it to Mercedes.
Als ich dann so das erste Stückchen Schokolade von der Tafel,
This was the first piece of chocolate I'd had
Schokoladenonkel,
from the chocolate
so
uncle.
abbiss,
And when I bit into it, it was heaven on earth.
Himmel auf Erden, ne?
Midnight of Wednesday, the 11th of May, 1949. The blockade of Berlin is due to end as crowds gather at the Russian-British frontier.
The Soviet climb-down turned a major crisis for the West into a triumph. In the East, people knew nothing of this. Their only task was to follow the leader. Millions were persuaded that central planning and collective labor were the only road to prosperity and a just society. And their governments assured them they were the envy of the world.
Jeder von uns wurde von Erregung gepackt, als hörte oder erlebte, wie Westdeutschlands Jugend die Zonengrenzen sprengte. Auf diesen Augenblick hatten sie gewartet. Diesen Weg konnte ihnen kein USA-Soldat und kein Bonner Polizist verlegen.
And when China went communist in 1949, the Soviet Union could trumpet the inevitability of world revolution.
Теперь на одной четверти земного шара возникло могучее содружество народов социалистических стран. Теперь каждый третий человек живет и трудится при социализме. Теперь нас больше миллиарда.
On Stalin's 70th birthday, the people were called out to celebrate the onward march of communism. leader watched Tamara Banketik come forward.
I was transported into a fairy tale. I had eyes only for him. He had such kindly eyes. It was as if he was my father. I just wanted to touch him.
Tamara was 11 at the time, and like the girl in the fairy tale, when the ball was over, she had to hand back her dress. The way most Soviet people lived had little to do with the picture painted by the party elite.
We lived in terrible conditions. It wasn't a house, but a little shed. There was no running water or electricity. Each day I only had money for one ration of bread. I had to fight myself to stop eating it before I got home and shared it with my mother.
Inside this closed world, information about the West was totally controlled.
Ложью и клеветой заполнены столбцы реакционных американских газет. Каков же этот хваленный образ жизни? Посмотрите на их искусство. Посмотрите на их спорт. Посмотрите на эту борьбу в вольноамериканском стиле. Посмотрите, как ухаживает за собачкой миллионера и как безработные стоят в очереди за бурдой.
У нас была страна справедливая, так нас учили. We knew our society was just, and that capitalism was terrible, and people were exploited. That's what we were taught. It didn't matter how badly I lived now, I hoped it would get better. I believed in Stalin and knew that life would improve.
Юные ленинцы, до борьбы за справу Ленина, Сталина, будьте готовы!
From childhood, citizens were constantly reminded of the sacrifices of the Great Patriotic War. 20 million had died, and it must never happen again. Over 70% of the country's budget went into making the Soviet Union a superpower. Defense was the watchword. All over Eastern Europe, communist governments mounted show trials of so-called traitors to instill fear.
Před státním soudem v Praze byla souzena osmičlená banda amerických špionů a terorystů.
Przed Wojskowym Sądem Rejonowym w Warszawie stanęli członkowie antypaństwowego i antyludowego ośrodka, którzy na zlecenie...
Americká plutokracie cynicky šlape po všech zásadách mezinárodního práva a diplomatických vztahů.
W łańcuchu bezpośrednich przygotowań do napaści na Polskę, na Związek Radziecki, na kraje demokracji ludowej. W łańcuchu
žádám pro všechny obviněné trest smrti. Nešť váš rozsudek dopadne jako železná pěst, bez nejmenšího slitování.
Thousands were executed. Millions of others were sent to prison camps, all in the name of the people.
Можно мне вас поцеловать, товарищ Сталин? За все! За все, что вы сделали для нашего народа! Для нас! Отец Сталин!
Иван Сталин! И внутрь Сталин!
Мира и счастья всем вам, друзья мои!
But Stalin still lacked the one thing which would really put Soviet power on an equal footing with the West. September 1949, he had it.
Grim news. The communist bloc also has the atom bomb.
In the West, smug superiority gave way to alarm.
Behind the Iron Curtain, the most sobering threat ever to menace free men. The target area is our North American continent, but the bullseye of the enemy's target is you, your family, your home.
We're living in a country that's the finest place on earth, but some folks don't appreciate this land that gave them birth. I hear that up in Washington they're having an awful fuss, 'cause communists and spies are making monkeys out of us. The bureaus and departments have been busy night and day. They're figuring out just how we gave our secrets all away. And Congress has appointed a committee, so they said, to find out who's American and who's a low-down red.
Communism in reality is not a political party. It is a way of life, an evil and malignant way of life. It reveals a condition akin to disease that spreads like an epidemic. And like an epidemic, a quarantine is necessary to keep it from infecting this nation.
Stalin's atom bomb and the communist takeover in China drove America into its own sort of paranoia. Communists, real or imagined, were pursued in the full glare of publicity.
Are you a member of the Communist Party? Or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
It's unfortunate and tragic that I have to teach this committee the basic principles of Americanism.
That's not the question. Are you or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
I have never sullied the honor of the American people.
Are you a member of the Communist Party?
Are you a member of the Communist Party?
There is not a communist bone in my body.
As I travel around, I still have people say, well, why are you so hard on communists? They're just another political party like any other, and a poor minority at that, and so misunderstood. Well, we don't want them misunderstood, and that's why we're making this film. And that's why I say they are lying, dirty, shrewd, godless, murderous, determined, and it is not an American political party like any other. It's an outlawed organization, taking its orders and instructions from another government to do everything possible to destroy our government. It's an international criminal conspiracy.
The FBI charged us with being traitors, being loyal to the Soviet Union rather than the United States. Anything that was taking place, we were interfering and carrying out orders from the Soviet Union, which was nonsense, absolute nonsense. We were carrying out orders from decisions of our membership at that point.
Manny Freed of the Machinists' Union in Buffalo was just one small target.
J. Edgar Hoover sent in a team of 25 FBI men to get me. They had decided that I was the symbol of the left in the community, and they must break me. They visited every single friend of my wife's in that social circle, and one by one pressured them to break off their friendship with us.
Freed was hounded out of his union, and the FBI told local firms not to employ him.
They wrecked my marriage. No question about it. They wrecked my marriage. The difficulties in the union I could handle. The difficulties they caused in my marriage were terrible. Terrible. Really terrible.
Main Street, USA, at peace, unaware that a cabal of conspirators plots its enslavement. The populace is ordered to attend to hear the dictates of their new masters.
The official name of the government established by the revolution shall be known as the United Soviet States of America, USSA.
Without a control press, red tyranny could not survive, so the town's newspaper editor, who is likely to be independent, is quickly seized to adorn a concentration camp.
To show what could lie ahead unless Americans were vigilant, a small town in Wisconsin acted out a Soviet takeover for a day.
The Russian army came into the schools, burned school books there in a bonfire.
Bill Sveinler organized the putsch at the school.
They arrested all of the clergy in the community, the Catholic priest, the Lutheran minister, the Methodist minister, the mayor, the chief of police, Dad. You know, there was a crowd in there, really, nuns, the whole works.
What happens to the economy in the Red Heavens is enough to plant despair in the heart of any housewife. But the generous dictators can always produce a soup line.
The Americanism program was developed to teach pride in being an American. Because of this day that we had, that the kids that went to school got an education that couldn't come out of a book. It was an education where we saw firsthand that we had it pretty good as Americans.
It can't happen here? Well, this is what it looks like if it should.
Popular fears about Soviet world domination were further fueled when war broke out in Korea. The West sent troops to hold the line against communist expansion. And back home, newsreels made clear what was at stake.
Australian fighter planes and their fighting crews go into action, along with United States Air Force units doing a round-the-clock job of delivering death and destruction to communists vainly endeavoring to escape. The final job of mopping up snipers ends in victory. It's weary business chasing red bandits and liberating a country whose only wish is freedom from aggression. It also calls for sacrifice in lives and blood of Koreans and Americans who are grimly determined to stop communist imperialism.
The Soviets told the opposite story.
Американские империалисты развязали войну против свободолюбивого корейского народа. И все это делается под флагом Организации Объединенных Наций, призванной служить делу мира.
В Москве была паника. Закупали продукты. Будет война.
In Moscow, there was a war scare. Everyone started hoarding. The Americans were waiting to destroy us as an island of socialism in the turbulent seas of world imperialism. We were told no more than that. So everything was simple. No doubts. They are our rivals, our enemies.
And the rivalries were also fought out in a propaganda war.
My name is Ronald Reagan. Last year, the contributions of 16 million Americans to the Crusade for Freedom made possible this powerful 135,000-watt Radio Free Europe transmitter in Western Germany. This station daily pierces the Iron Curtain with the truth, answering the lies of the Kremlin and bringing a message of hope to millions trapped behind the Iron Curtain. The Crusade for Freedom is your chance and mine to fight communism.
Alexei Kozlov was among the huge audience who secretly listened to Radio Liberty and the BBC.
Jazz was banned, and they put out propaganda about jazz players and Americans, suggesting it was just one step from playing sax to murder. There was a saying, today he plays jazz, and tomorrow he betrays the nation. If you said you loved Impressionism or Louis Armstrong, you could be tried under the article Idolaters of the West.
Popatrzcie, do jakiego stopnia zwyrodnienia doszły te dzieła artystów kapitalistycznego Zachodu. Imperializm brutalnie wprzągł sztukę w służbę swoich interesów. Jej pesymizm ma złamać opór kandydatów na mięso armatnie, odebrać im wiarę w człowieka, stusić chęć do buntu, wolę walki o lepsze jutro. W przyszłych mordercach kobiet i dzieci obrazy te mają wzbudzić pogardę dla ludzi i ich spraw, oduczyć myślenia, rozpętać najniższe instynkty. Sztuce gnijących form przeciwstawiamy dzieła artystów, którzy stają się czynnymi współtwórcami nowej epoki.
Stalin died in 1953. His ambitions and fears had formed Soviet man. His legacy would last for decades. But under the new leadership of Nikita Khrushchev, the worst aspects of Stalin's terror slowly disappeared. In the countries of Eastern Europe, there were calls for more independence from Moscow. In October 1956, Hungarian students held an anti-Soviet march in Budapest. The authorities met the demonstration with force, and it spiraled into revolution as workers and soldiers joined in.
It was so spontaneous. We were fighting for the freedom of our country.
Gergely Pongratz, a farmer, had rushed to Budapest and within hours was leading a group of freedom fighters.
Russian infantry came behind the tanks. But the Russian soldiers, they got in a fire so terrible that they went in the buildings and they was coming from entrance to entrance. I saw a Russian head looking out and I pulled the trigger. And I saw the Russian soldier fell out on the sidewalk. I started to cry. I killed a human being.
After just 4 days of intensive fighting, the Soviet forces withdrew.
Hungary was in glories. The whole country was in glories. The Soviet troops left already Budapest, and the meetings are going on with the Soviet government that they're going to leave Hungary, and Hungary is going to be a free and independent country. Now, can you imagine how we was feeling at that time? We were in the glories, in the heaven.
In celebration, crowds ransacked party buildings, burning Soviet propaganda and the works of Marx and Lenin. Hungarians gathered round foreign embassies, calling for recognition of their new government. But though Western countries had long talked of freeing the enslaved peoples, they took no action.
This is Hungary calling. This is Hungary calling. The last remaining station. Early this morning, the Soviet troops launched a general attack on Hungary. We are requesting you to send us immediate aid.
The West did nothing, in brutal acknowledgement that Hungary was part of the Soviet sphere of influence and had been since 1945.
Будапешт. Сейчас вы увидите, что происходило в столице Венгрии, как в проклятые времена Гитлера. Улицы Будапешта были озарены зловещим огнем костров. Сжигались творения свободолюбивых писателей и великих мыслителей. Недаром один из участников путча сказал корреспонденту Daily News: «Сильная, большая Америка толкнула нас на это».
250,000 refugees left Hungary for the West before the Red Army closed the border.
I went with my mother and my 12-year-old sister. And we crossed the border, we went about 15, 20 yards. And my mother turned around. She went a few yards back under the flag, the Hungarian flag, and in a handkerchief, she put dirt. She's buried in the United States, but that dirt is under her head. Hungarian dirt, Hungarian land.
Добро пожаловать в Москву к веселым берегам. Мы окружим вас и заботой, и теплом.
Добро пожаловать в Москву, а мы приедем к вам. Без переводчика друг друга мы поймем.
With the division of the world reconfirmed, Soviet leaders now spoke beguilingly of peaceful coexistence. Selected foreigners were allowed in to see the fruits of socialism. Though Soviet people could not travel out, the Americans were allowed to bring an exhibition to Moscow. It was a revelation for the jazz musician Alexei Kozlov.
It was very difficult to get in. Thousands of people queued endlessly. The Communist Party lost their hold over so many people by raising the Iron Curtain even for a month. It was as if we were discovering a new planet, stepping into the future. We were stunned. We couldn't believe people really lived like that.
Let's go to the hop. Let's go to the hop. Oh, baby, let's go to the hop. Oh, baby, let's go to the hop. Let's go to the hop. Well, you can swing and you can groove and you can really stop.
Premier Khrushchev was taken round by Vice President Nixon. On one of the stands, the leaders got into an impromptu public debate about the merits of their political systems.
Америка 150 лет, значит, существует, вот ее уровень. Мы 42 года, еще не совершилось. Еще нам 7 лет, и мы будем на таком же уровне, как Америка. А в следующий пойдем дальше, вперед.
100 лет резерве остается, да.
А?
100 лет резерве остается.
Но мы, когда вас обгоним на разъезде, мы вам приветствие такое любезное скажем. Потом, если хотите, мы можем остановиться и сказать, пожалуйста, за нами, пожалуйста. Вопрос социального устройства. Вы хотите при капитализме? Живите.
Nixon challenged Khrushchev to open up his country.
I can only say that if this competition, which you have just described so effectively, in which you plan to outstrip us, and particularly in the production of consumer goods, if this competition is to do the best for both of our peoples and for people everywhere, there must be a free exchange of ideas.
Exchanging ideas was difficult, while Soviets kept their borders with the West heavily guarded and mined. There remained only one gap in the fence: Berlin, where Germans could still move freely between the east and west parts of the city. And millions voted with their feet.
3,3 Millionen kamen seit 1945 in den Westen. Es sind Angehörige aller Berufe. Doch seit einiger Zeit flüchten im Zuge der verstärkten Kollektivierung der Landwirtschaft immer mehr Bauern.
The ever-increasing flow of refugees from East Germany put Berlin at the center of Western attention once again.
Why did you come here?
While the life in East Germany is no good, the schoolmaster want to have my boy communist machen.
He wanted to make your boy a communist.
Yes.
Anita Müller lived in the East with her husband, small child, and her parents. They thought about leaving.
Our life was too restricted. So much was forbidden. There was an expression, the Golden West. We're going to the Golden West. That said it all.
In the summer of 1961, the East German authorities acted. They closed the border. They said it was to defend themselves against the West.
On August 13th, 1961, German imperialism was shown clearly and distinctly. Here you cannot pass. Here are the frontiers of your power. Here is the German Democratic Republic.
It was a shock. Can you imagine a wall built through the middle of the city? We thought, we can't get out, it's all over. Now we really are locked in.
East Berliners who have apartments facing the border take the long chance when they get orders to leave their homes for the interior. While an East German guard attempts to yank her back to prison, West Berliners pull her to a fire net and freedom.
Thousands tried to escape in the first weeks. When running for it became too dangerous, people were driven to try other ways. Anita Müller's brother, already in the West, was determined to get her out. He and others began to dig a 200-yard tunnel right under the wall. When they were ready, they sent a message for Anita to bring her husband and child to a cafe on the East Berlin side.
We waited a long time in this cafe. It was like a spy film. There were secret signs, a newspaper, a party badge, a bag in the right hand, a password. But if things went wrong, we could be shot. Everyone knew that.
Finally, she was led to 7 Schönholzerstraße, within sight of the wall. The tunnel was about to break through in the cellar.
It was frightening down there. In the middle, directly below the wall, someone had put up a sign saying, "You are leaving the eastern sector." And I thought, I'm in the West. I finally got through and came up the other side, and I could hear a film camera running. I thought, what's going on? How disgusting. This really is the evil West. Everything for the press and television.
Alles wird genommen für die Presse und das Fernsehen.
50 others escaped with Anita.
Meiner Familie konnte ich nicht sagen, dass ich gehe, weil
I couldn't warn my parents we were leaving because we knew the secret police would interrogate them. My mother was very ill, and I wasn't sure I'd ever see her again.
Wir wussten, ob wir uns noch mal sehen in unserem ganzen Leben.
My last memory is of her by the front door. She died a few years later. She was never given permission to visit us.
Uns besuchen kommen.
In the West, it was dubbed a wall of shame. In the East, it was called the anti-fascist protective rampart. 2 ideologies, 2 sets of slogans, 2 hostile camps. This was the brave new world. only 16 years after Soviet and Western troops embraced each other on the Elbe River. The hopes for a just and enduring peace seemed further away than ever.